What if the most hated woman in America was also the most right? She was called a fascist, a cult leader, a heartless monster. But 50 years after her death, her books still sell 500,000 copies a year. More people have read Atlas Shrugged than any political book in American history except the Bible. This is the story of Ayn Rand, and she does not care if you like her. February the 2nd, 1905, St. Petersburg, Russia. Alisa Zinovievna Rosenbaum is born into a comfortable Jewish family. Her father Zinovy owns a pharmacy. The family lives well. Young Alisa is intense, serious. She reads constantly. At 9 years old, she decides she will be a writer. Not hopes, decides. Then the world collapses. 1917, the Bolsheviks seize power. Soldiers come to the pharmacy. They nail a red seal on the door. Nationalized. Everything the family built, taken in an afternoon. The Rosenbaums flee to Crimea. They nearly starve. Alisa watches her father, a proud, self-made man, reduced to nothing by men with guns and ideology. She is 12 years old. She will never forget. The family returns to Petrograd. Alisa enters university. She studies philosophy and history. She discovers Aristotle, reason, logic. The idea that reality exists and the human mind can grasp it. She also discovers something else in Soviet Russia. The collective is everything. The individual is nothing. She watches brilliant students mouth slogans they don't believe. She watches professors destroyed for independent thought. She decides this is the most evil system ever created. 1926. A miracle. She gets a visa to visit relatives in Chicago. She has no intention of returning. At the ship's railing, she watches Russia disappear. She is 21. She speaks broken English. She has $50. She has absolute certainty that she will conquer America. She arrives in New York Harbor. The skyline hits her like a revelation. Skyscrapers, steel and glass reaching toward the sky. This is what free men build. She will write about this skyline for the rest of her life. She stays with relatives in Chicago briefly, but she knows where she belongs. Hollywood, where stories are made. She changes her name. Ayn Rand. She wants to write screenplays. On her second day in Hollywood, she literally bumps into Cecil B. DeMille on the street, the greatest director in America. He gives her a job as an extra, then a script reader. She learns English by reading every screenplay she can find. She meets Frank O'Connor on set. Tall, handsome, quiet, the opposite of her in every way. They marry in 1929. He will stand beside her for 50 years, often in her shadow, always loyal. The 1930s are brutal. She writes plays that flop. She works odd jobs. She writes a novel called We the Living, based on her life in Soviet Russia. Publishers reject it. When it finally comes out in 1936, critics call it anti-Soviet propaganda. She doesn't care. She knows what she saw. 1938. She begins the book that will change her life, The Fountainhead. She works on it for 7 years. Some days she writes one paragraph. The manuscript grows to 700 pages. 12 publishers reject it. One editor at Bobbs Merrill fights for it against his own company. The hero is Howard Rourke, an architect who refuses to compromise his vision. He would rather work in a quarry than design buildings he doesn't believe in. Rourke is everything Rand believes a human should be: independent, uncompromising, deaf to the opinions of others. When a housing project is built using his stolen designs but altered beyond recognition, he dynamites it. Then stands trial and defends himself. The jury acquits him. The message is clear. A creator owes nothing to the mob. 1943, The Fountainhead is published. Critics savage it, but readers devour it. Word of mouth carries it. It sells slowly at first, then faster and faster. By 1945, it is a bestseller. Warner Brothers buys the film rights. Gary Cooper plays Rourke. The book will sell over 6 million copies. Ayn Rand becomes famous. But she is not done. She has a bigger idea, a much bigger idea. She begins working on a novel that will take 14 years to complete. She calls it Atlas Shrugged. The question it asks is simple. What would happen if the people who move the world went on strike? In the novel, the most productive people in America begin to disappear. Inventors, industrialists, artists, scientists. They vanish one by one, recruited by a mysterious man named John Galt. Who is John Galt? That question opens the book. It becomes a catchphrase, a cultural signal. The economy collapses. Railroads stop running. Factories go dark. The government seizes more control. Everything gets worse. The lights of New York go out one by one. The final message is devastating. The mind is the engine of the world. Stop the engine, and everything dies. October 1957. Atlas Shrugged is published. It is 1,200 pages long. Rand has poured everything into it. Every idea, every argument, every ounce of fury she has carried since that day the soldiers sealed her father's pharmacy. Critics are vicious. The New York Times calls it written out of hate. The National Review, a conservative magazine, says it is nearly perfect in its immorality. Academics dismiss it. The literary establishment closes ranks against her. She will never be taken seriously by the people she wants most to convince. But readers line up around the block. The book becomes the most influential novel of the 20th century. It still sells hundreds of thousands of copies every year. Surveys consistently find it among the most impactful books Americans have ever read. A Library of Congress survey asks Americans what book most influenced their life. Atlas Shrugged comes second, after the Bible. After Atlas Shrugged, Rand stops writing fiction. She says everything she needed to say in novels she has said. Now she will say it directly. Now comes Objectivism. Rand's philosophy, she builds it on 4 pillars. Reality exists independent of consciousness. Reason is man's only means of knowledge. Every person has the right to exist for their own sake. And laissez-faire capitalism is the only moral economic system. She doesn't argue that capitalism works better. She argues that it is the only moral system. That taking a man's wealth by force is theft, whether a mugger does it or a government. The collective. That's what they ironically call themselves. A tight inner circle of devotees. Nathaniel Branden, 25 years younger, brilliant, charismatic. He becomes her intellectual heir. He founds the Nathaniel Branden Institute, teaching objectivism in cities across America. Leonard Peikoff, Alan Greenspan. Yes, that Alan Greenspan, the future chairman of the Federal Reserve, sitting on the floor of Ayn Rand's apartment, discussing philosophy. Then the affair. This is where the story turns dark. Rand and Branden begin a sexual relationship. She tells both their spouses. She does not ask permission. She announces it. She frames it as rational, logical. The 2 greatest minds in objectivism naturally must be together. It is an exercise in reason, she says. Frank O'Connor says nothing. He starts painting. He drinks more. Barbara Branden suffers in silence. The movement pretends it isn't happening. The philosopher of reason has created something deeply irrational, and everyone is too afraid to say so. 1968, The Break. Branden has secretly been in a relationship with a younger woman. When Rand discovers this, she is not rational. She is not logical. She is furious. She denounces him publicly, excommunicates him from the movement, destroys his reputation. The Nathaniel Branden Institute closes. The inner circle fractures. Half the movement vanishes overnight. It is the most human moment in the life of a woman who preached that emotions must bow to reason. The 1970s. Rand is increasingly isolated. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s has passed her by. She despises the hippies. She despises the New Left. But she also despises the religious right. Frank's health declines. She watches television obsessively. Phil Donahue invites her on his show. She is electric on camera, sharp, combative. The audience boos her. She does not flinch. She gives lectures at universities. Students line up to challenge her. She destroys their arguments one by one. She opposes the Vietnam War as irrational. She despises Ronald Reagan for mixing religion with politics. She supports abortion rights. She defies every political category. The libertarians claim her. She rejects them as anarchists. The conservatives claim her. She rejects them as mystics. She belongs to no one but herself. November 9th, 1979. Frank O'Connor dies. Ayn Rand, the woman who wrote that emotion should serve reason, is shattered. Friends say they have never seen grief like this. She barely functions for months. The woman who wrote that a person should stand alone discovers what it means to actually be alone. March the 6th, 1982, New York City. Ayn Rand dies of heart failure at age 77. At her funeral, a 6-foot-tall floral arrangement in the shape of a dollar sign stands next to her casket. She would have approved. Her influence is everywhere. Alan Greenspan becomes chairman of the Federal Reserve. He keeps a copy of Atlas Shrugged in his office. When the 2008 financial crisis hits, critics blame Greenspan's deregulation. They blame Rand's philosophy. Greenspan testifies before Congress and admits he found a flaw in his ideology. Rand's enemies celebrate. Her defenders say Greenspan betrayed her ideas, not followed them. The debate rages on. Steve Jobs read The Fountainhead. So did Mark Cuban. Travis Kalanick named himself after the book's hero. Peter Thiel built Palantir on objectivist principles. Elon Musk was asked about Rand in interviews. Silicon Valley is soaked in her influence, whether it admits it or not. Here is what Ayn Rand got right. She understood from personal experience what happens when the state swallows the individual. She understood that creators and producers are not parasites, but the engine of civilization. She understood that guilt is a weapon used to control the productive. She said these things when almost no one else would. Here is what haunts her legacy. She preached reason, but ran her movement like a cult. She preached independence, but demanded obedience. She preached that emotions should serve reason, but was destroyed by her own emotions. She was a woman of contradictions, who despised contradictions. 50 years after her death, Ayn Rand remains the most polarizing intellectual in American history. Politicians still quote her. Professors still mock her. Silicon Valley founders still name their children after her characters. And every year, new readers discover Atlas Shrugged and feel something click inside their minds. You can love her or hate her, but you cannot ignore her. She made certain of that.